Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone, back with another exciting episode. I've got Jack Miller from Establish the Run with me. We're going to talk about the running back dead zone this year. It's become a buzzword term, especially last season. And, we're going to talk about what happened last season, what is the RB dead zone, and how to apply it to this year's landscape, because I think things are changing a little bit in the fantasy landscape. So it'll be fun to talk through that with Jack. Jack, I'll throw it to you right away. You wrote an article for us last year, sort of like outlining the dead zone and then looking at, some potential exceptions to the dead zone. But in general, what is the running back dead zone?
Yeah, so basically the running back dead zone, the exact range isn't totally agreed upon within the industry, but when I've looked at it, I've found the biggest, extreme differences between positions in rounds 3 through 6. And it's basically a spot where running backs historically have been a really bad investment in fantasy drafts, and on the converse, wide receivers have been pretty good. And so basically, the thesis, it's not super complicated. It's just that it's wiser to focus on wide receivers in those rounds. And if you look at best ball win rates or advance rates or, whatever metric you want, when I first looked at it, I looked at best ball win rates using best ball 10 data, but now we can also look at underdog advance rate data. And basically whatever you look at, wide receivers in rounds 3 through 6 have had above average outcomes over the past 7 seasons consecutively, and running backs in that range have been below average for the past 7 consecutive seasons. And so when you find something like that, where it's just so consistent and repeatable and dependable year over year, it's really interesting given the fluctuations that usually occur with this roster construction data.
Yeah, and we look at last season, it was sort of exemplified why we avoid the running backs in the dead zone and try to pound wide receivers. Now, you did a really good article on underdog advance rates and kind of looking at them in light of player context. And there are a few reasons why the running back dead zone was so great to avoid for running backs who, by the way, if you on average, the dead zone running backs picked on underdog had an advance rate of 13.5% of the time. Break even is like 16.6% of the time. So it was pretty poor. A few things happened there. One, like very few dead zone running backs were any good whatsoever. We had a lot of complete flops. We had a couple guys, depending on how you look at it, did well. Javonte Williams was okay, but not a smash. DeAndre Swift at times, when people got a little scared of him, was falling. He did really well, but there just weren't too many successes. And then you look at the wide receiver side of things, Jack, and Jamar Chase and Cooper Kupp were absolute, league winners last season. And your odds of drafting them were increased if you were just drafting wide receivers consistently in that rounds 3 through 6. There was some non-dead zone stuff that impacted the win rates too, which was in round 2, for whatever reason, just kind of randomness. The running backs crushed in round 2 and the wide receivers stunk in round 2 this year. So we really saw the build last season on underdog was kind of like running back, and then pounding wide receivers in the dead zone, maybe getting an elite quarterback there.
Yeah, exactly. And when I did that dead zone article last year, I kind of speculated that maybe the dead zone could start earlier because last year the early round running backs were really pushed up. So I think there were like 16 or 17 running backs going in the first 2 rounds, which was way higher than the average from the past few seasons. But that kind of ended up being completely wrong, and the second round running backs just completely torched. And then the guys in rounds 3 through 6 still just fell flat on their faces. And like you said, that kind of combination where loading up on running backs early paves the way for you to load up on wide receivers in the dead zone. And so it was just a perfect storm of teams that took RB or 2 RBs in the first 2 rounds, really just smashing because they basically hit on just everything from a roster building standpoint.
Yeah. And just thinking through the running back dead zone too, again, before we apply it to this year, the running backs, one running back that I get associated with, and I did draft a little bit in best ball last season, is Mike Davis. I took him a little bit in the 6th round in best ball. I did avoid him completely in redraft, but I think he was a good example of sort of your dead zone pick, where it's someone that has a questionable skill set. I thought he was going to be a better pass catcher than he was, but a questionable skill set on a team that is not a lock to be good. I did think if in hindsight, Atlanta, obviously was horrific and we would have just avoided that situation. Going into the season, I did think they would provide some high value touches for running back, but he was dependent on this team being good, and there was a little bit more team level fragility, and there was obviously skill level fragility, and things just go wrong when, at times when you're banking on both of those. And it's sort of hard to sometimes find differences. Like there's J.K. Dobbins this year. I think Baltimore is, you can say he's dependent on the team doing well, but I think Baltimore is like on a different level than Atlanta heading into last year, even though we didn't expect Atlanta to necessarily be bad. So like those are the types of backs we're looking at. So I don't really know where I was going with that, Jack, other than like, some of the guys that hit last year, we mentioned Javonte being okay and DeAndre Swift being good. Those are talented backs that we really like. Now their situations maybe not ideal, but it's sort of like you need one or the other to kind of be either the talent to be really good or the team to really have a lot of confidence in them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people look at youth too, because I think one of the main issues with the running backs in the dead zone is just that they can be projected for a lot of volume. Like if we go back to the Mike Davis example, he was kind of being projected for a bunch of volume because there wasn't really anyone else on the team. And like at this point last year, it kind of would have been wild to suggest Cordero Patterson would have an RB1 season in his, age 29 or 30 season. And so all that volume kind of fell through to Mike Davis, and that made him look like a pretty solid pick. But like you said, the skill level was a concern. He was kind of a journeyman vet who was just being propped up because of projectable volume. And I think that's kind of why the dead zone exists, in my opinion, at least, is just like guys who like we give volume to, even though they don't project as super smashes. And then those young guys like a Dobbins, like a Swift, like a Javonte, we can talk about Breece Hall in a minute here, who maybe have a chance to emerge from that dead zone because they're being put there because of uncertainty when the talent and the role could be bigger than we imagine.
Yeah. So now that we kind of have a basic understanding of what the dead zone is, what types of backs in particular really exemplify it, how it affects roster building. Like let's look at 2022, and there are some similarities to last year. We're seeing running backs go pretty early again in the first two rounds. People are really hinging on those hit rates of the running backs last year. By underdog ADP in the first two rounds, there's 11 running backs going in the first two rounds, which might be a little bit less than last year. I'd have to check, but there's a lot of other backs that if you were to just tack on the beginning of the third round, you kind of get closer to 14, 15 backs that are going there. So that aspect is similar. One thing I think is a little bit different, I think we are getting some more talented running backs like Breece Hall and J.K. Dobbins in the dead zone. And wide receiver to me, Jack, doesn't seem as strong as it's been in past years. It's always hard to tell like if that's actually the case or just a feel thing. But I don't know. Last year, man, I felt like at every turn I had pairings that I was just like, this is awesome. Like even guys that didn't necessarily work out. I was pumped to draft Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, DK, I guess Metcalf was earlier, but Tyler Lockett. We had T. Higgins, Jamar Chase in round 5. It just seemed like at each pocket there was someone I was comfortable with. Whereas this year, Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore at the 3-4 turn, we have them ranked there. I think they're fine there, but it feels a little bit shakier than last year, in my opinion. Even someone like Metcalf, now has a lot of question marks. And the guys that really hit last year, Jack, they're all going early now. So like Cooper Kupp's going in the first 2 rounds. Jamar Chase is going in the first 2 rounds. We lost Calvin Ridley. Some of the guys that didn't even necessarily do that well last year, like CeeDee Lamb, are going in the first 2 rounds due to opportunity. Debo's going in the first 2 rounds. He was another hit. And all the guys that were in the first 2 rounds last year are sort of there still. Diggs, even though he didn't have a great season, is there. Devontae, even with the trade, is there. Tyreek Hill, even with the trade, is there. So how do you see all of this sort of coming together and impacting how you're drafting?
I think I think for me personally, I do agree that there are some intriguing running backs in the dead zone. I think I kind of still like the receivers here. I mean, like
Mhm.
you brought up DJ Moore at the 3-4 turn. You're talking to the wrong guy
Buddy,
for
my
anti
DJ
DJ
Moore
Moore.
exposure, like I'm trying to remain unbiased and objective here, but my DJ Moore exposure, we have DJ Moore Waddle ranked great there. So yeah, I mean, the ETR ranks are sort of there. I don't know if I have. I was taking him at 3-4 turn last year too, so I guess it's the same thing. It seems like
Yeah,
there's less guys though. Like last year, I had like 8 guys I would take at the 3-4 turn, like Amari Cooper, DJ Moore, Lockett, the Rams. I mean, I don't know. It feels like there's less to me though if you missed that, but maybe I'm off. And I loved Mike Evans for a while, but he's gotten pushed. He's mid round 2 now.
yeah. Evans has really gotten pushed up, which I think is good because I think he deserves it. But I still think that there's a decent number of receivers, and for me, I mean, I guess the bigger thing is like in drafts, do you think, given that we have just so much data on the dead zone, like are you actually taking running backs, or do you just think it's like more viable and like maybe if someone slips this year, you'll take one?
Yeah, so there's a couple things for me so far that are going on. One, I'm emphasizing taking a quarterback at the back end of the dead zone. I was doing this a little bit last year with tight ends and quarterbacks at the end of round 6, but I think beginning around 6, maybe I'm even a little bit more prone to. Part of that's like I think the mid-tier quarterbacks are overvalued, which makes the properly valued upper tier quarterbacks more attractive, in my opinion. So if wide receiver is not as strong there, I don't mind like switching to a onesie position. Unfortunately, I don't really have. I think Waller and Kittle are kind of fine too. Like Kittle's going in 5 sometimes. Like I'm not a huge Kittle fan this year, looking at some of the team play calling and stuff. But in round 5, like I'm taking that shot. We're above market on Darren Waller, so I think hitting the onesie positions makes sense to an extent. But there are running backs that I think we should talk through. James Conner at the 3-4 turn is a tough one. Because we saw the high value touches last year with Chase Edmonds out were just insane. How much does Darrell Williams come in and take the Chase Edmonds pass catch and roll is undetermined. You've got Zeke, who is kind of like he's sort of like the prototypical dead zone running back. So I'm having a tough time with him because questionable talent at this point. It's for sure a question mark. I made some excuses for him going into last year, but another sort of down year with Pollard behind him. Very questionable. I think the offense, as long as he stays healthy, is good enough to support him, but there's always risk. It's not as deep as an offense as before. So I guess those are the guys in rounds like that. I'm looking at that 3-4 turn. I guess Akers would be the other guy that's in that range that's sort of viable. So how do you feel about those 3?
Yeah, in general, I'm still, I think, taking receivers. I really get the Connor Bull argument. And I think I'm like slowly trying to like get myself all the way on him because like you said, like the high value touches could be there even if Darrell takes some of the receiving work, which he should. Connor can easily still have like a top 10 season, even if he gets like some of the Edmonds work as well as the same thing he had last year. So I'm kind of talking myself into James Conner, even though he just like you said, he kind of strikes me as like that prototypical guy who goes in the dead zone and then falls on his face. Zeke and Connor concern me, or Zeke and Akers, sorry, concern me a little bit more. Akers, I think I've seen Edwin on Twitter, and maybe I'm putting just too much stock still in the
Oh, the
Achilles.
Twitter doctors. I like
I mean,
Edwin. No offense, Edwin.
he's a good Twitter doctor.
He is. Yes.
I mean, he came back in 6 months last year, but like he still wasn't like good in 6 months. His efficiency in the playoffs wasn't that good. I kind of think right now that maybe the Akers Henderson gap is too wide, and so for me personally, I like taking Henderson later, and then taking a receiver over Akers, mostly just because of concerns about his effectiveness after the Achilles, as well as like if Henderson could be involved still. And then Zeke, I just like taking Pollard a few rounds later.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm gonna have more Pollard than Zeke. I don't have a lot of Zeke, but there you do sometimes an underdog in these wide receiver heavy drafts where I'm like, I mean, 5th round Zeke, he's not going in the 5th round. He's going like early to mid 4th. But if he falls to the 5th, I don't know. I'm kind of in. The guy that I'm most in on so far really has been Dobbins, whose ADP I just don't understand. I mean, his ADP is down to 57. It's like it's almost the 5-6 turn, right? Yeah. It's like mid 5, end of 5. I don't get it. I mean, he was someone that we were like, oh, he's way overdrafted last year because he was going in the middle round 2. And then by the end of the draft season, he was going 3-4 turn. I was like, I'll take some by the end of before he got hurt draft season. I was taking him at the 3-4 turn. And I just don't know if there's a difference between this year and last year unless you're really putting a lot of stock on the injury, but the injury was so early in the off season and the way guys come back from ACLs nowadays, I'm not concerned by it. It's a great offense. I think he's talented. Like the only issue with Dobbins is he doesn't catch passes. Probably not going to catch a lot, but especially on underdog with half PPR, I don't know. I'm okay with that. And I'm also more okay with the guys that don't catch passes in best ball a little bit sometimes, just because like in redraft, I'm just so picky about which running backs I take because I think a 0 running back approach or some mechanism of that is the best way to redraft. Underdog and best ball tournaments work a little bit differently. Just in the fact that, someone churning out a bunch of really good weeks can be super useful, even if they don't necessarily hit that elite running back ceiling. So he's been the guy I've been taking the most. I actually kind of prefer him relative to ADP over Breece Hall and Travis Etienne, but those would be the other 2 kind of young backs that are in the mix there. We have Hall as draftable in our ranks as kind of like fine at his ADP. We have Etienne as pretty overdrafted. So I'm curious your thoughts on Etienne.
I'm definitely with you on Dobbins. I'll start by saying that I think between the crazy running back injuries last year and then the defensive injuries that the Ravens had, they were kind of forced to throw like way more than they would typically want to. And I think now that everyone's back healthy, defense is healthy, Dobbins and Edwards are healthy, they're going to get back to that super run heavy scheme that they had for the previous couple years, because like at this time last year, like the concern was that like Baltimore like only runs the ball and they never throw. And just because of this like insane mix of just outcomes that happened last year, on both sides of the ball, I think we're getting a discount on the rushing game. And Dobbins is obviously going to be the lead back in that. So I'm 100% with you on Dobbins. And I think he's the guy who, like, even if he doesn't fall, like you can just take him over the wide receivers at ADP, even though it's the dead zone. And then on Etienne, he's kind of in that like Connor group with me. Where I was out on him to start the offseason, but I'm slowly coming around. And it's kind of just that same reluctancy, whatever the word is, about running backs coming back from Achilles injuries, because I think James Robinson is going to miss time at the beginning of the year because of the Achilles. And then the reports out of early practices in Jacksonville are just that Etienne's catching a bunch of passes. So I've kind of come around on Etienne a little bit. I still don't think – I think he's like draftable. I'm still not going out of my way to draft him. And I'd still take a receiver over him. But like if he falls, I think I'm more okay with him than I was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the vets in here, which are kind of the ones we have to be careful with, because the vets a lot of times are the – incumbent projectable volume guys that, the running back shelf lives are short at any point in time. They could get overtaken or they could just flounder if the team situation isn't that good. David Montgomery is one where I'd rather have a wide receiver most of the times in this range. Like I'm drafting Godwin over him. I'm drafting Juju over him. Just kind of looking at like wide receivers around that ADP. I'm drafting Gabriel Davis over him most of the time. I do sort of at the very tail end of the dead zone am drafting some Josh Jacobs. I'm just kind of in on the Las Vegas offense. The more I look at it, you, me, and Mark Dankenbring did our team level overhaul for our projection inputs, and I think it could be like a pretty fun offense. And just looking at the profiles of the guys behind him, I'm not super concerned with Zamir White and Kenyon Drake possibly. So, but that's one of those ones where, again, it's tough to wait. He is sort of like the prototype you want to avoid. I do think this is someone in years past, though, that would have been just going more expensively.
Yeah, I think there's a few guys like that this year where, which I guess is why this conversation is interesting, where maybe this is the first year where the dead zone is kind of being factored in. I agree with you that Jacobs in past years would be going higher, and I don't think he's that bad right now, just because he should handle a large rushing role on a good offense. And another guy who's going like right at the end of the dead zone, who I think fits that as well, and then kind of fits the Jacobs mold as just the lead rusher, or the Dobbins mode. Dobbins.
I think I know who you're going with, but we'll see.
Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah.
Elijah
Mark's
Mitchell.
boy.
Yeah, Dank loves Elijah Mitchell. I think he's a fine pick at his 70.8 ADP. Niners offense is going to run a ton. It should be an efficient rushing offense too, regardless of who the quarterback is. And then Mitchell, when he was healthy last year, was just like far and away their lead runner. The issue was just sometimes he wasn't healthy, but like when he was on the field, he was easily Shanahan's guy. And I know they drafted Tyrion in the third round, but like I still think Mitchell is going to have every opportunity to be the lead back again this year.
Yeah. There's been in the last few years, I mean, there's I forgot who it was last year, but there's someone where it was just like the recency bias has almost gone the other way. This year at wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, to an extent, is someone that we like, who like we've gone from overvaluing like these spurts of production, like we saw with Amon-Ra at the end of last year, to devaluing them so much that we're not even counting them, to the point where if you draft guys like Mitchell and Amon-Ra, it's almost like if that production was real, you're almost just banking the upside because it's so neglected and discounted by the market. Where like maybe we should be counting it a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit. So I like that. That looks at most of the dead zone guys. I am trying to avoid Antonio Gibson. He's snuck up top of our ranks sometimes, but I don't know. I don't feel great where you've got the pass catching back in JD McKissick, and they drafted Brian Robinson, who I know Miko does our Dynasty stuff, likes Brian Robinson a good bit. I'm concerned to start the offseason. At first I was like, well, this is a guy, sometimes the upside case just doesn't hit, and I want to reinvest in the upside case at a lower price. But as the offseason's developed and just seeing what they did with drafting Brian Robinson, I don't know. I'm just a little weary there. I think he's kind of the last main guy to talk about. Thoughts on him or anybody else we might have missed?
Yeah, I'm not in on Gibson either. McKissick, when he was healthy at the start of last year, really was getting the routes and the passing downs. And then they brought in Brian Robinson. They invested a day 2 pick. And then Rivera's comments a month ago or whenever it was made it sound like it's kind of going to be a 3-headed monster running back. And so, yeah, I'd much rather take a receiver or Jacobs or Mitchell than Gibson at this point.
And then sort of the last note, you did ask me what I'm doing if I'm taking these running backs over these wide receivers. And part of it is I think you can change the way you start your draft, right? Like I'm not necessarily drafting more running backs on my team in the first 6-7 rounds. I'm mixing up the order a little bit though, where I might be more prone to take these round 2 wide receivers that I know stunk last year, but or round 1 wide receiver. Like I'd rather take Jamar Chase and J.K. Dobbins, for example, than Rashad Bateman and Alvin or I guess not Kamara, and then Najee Harris. Just kind of like looking at 2v2. So that's part of my thinking here is I can take a wide receiver, a premier wide receiver earlier and bank that production if I can get a running back in the dead zone who I think is like not that different of a bet than some of the first 2 round running backs. Whereas last year there was a starker contrast in my opinion. Some of it's getting sharper. Guys like Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley for a while we're going mid 3. If that happens again, I'm all over those guys. I love those builds with them as hero running backs in like kind of the start of the dead zone. But it seems like the market's adjusting and that's not as attainable anymore. Any other final thoughts for you?
Yeah, I think just what I tend to do is instead of like making it Jamar and Dobbins, like I would like to make it like Jamar and then who's a random second round running back? Jamar and like DeAndre Swift or Aaron Jones, and still get my like early running back, and then that can allow me to hammer receiver in the dead zone still. And I'll make exceptions for like Dobbins and then Mitchell at the 6-7 turn sometime. But like I still think in general I really want to focus on receivers there. And that's kind of where I am, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. It'll also be interesting to see how the ADPs develop. You know, we might be re-looking at this, Jack, when we do it more from a redraft perspective closer to the season. Like I'm kind of interested to see, underdogs gotten so big, and like a segment of those drafters are like much more wide receiver heavy. Like who knows, like maybe like FFPC main event time, we're seeing Josh Jacobs go at the 4-5 turn instead of the 5-6 turn, and it becomes a different conversation. And especially for redraft, I'm less prone to take these running backs in general, just right off the bat. All right, Jack, thanks so much for joining me to break down the running back dead zone. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please rate, review the podcast, and subscribe. It helps a lot. You can also subscribe to the video version at the Establish the Run YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up. Those sort of things help us deliver content like this for free. And best of luck navigating the dead zone this season.